Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we're reading from Canto 3, Chapter 2, verse 11. Again, it's Canto 3, Chapter 2, verse 11. The title of the chapter is Remembrance of Lord Krishna. So I'll read the verse and then we can start discussing it. Pradrayash yata tapta tapasam avitripta drisham nirnam adayantar adhadyastu sobimbam loka lochanam Pradar Shatapta Tapasam Avitripta Drisham Nrinam Adayantar Adhadyastu Subimbam Lokalochanam. Word by word. Pradarsha, by exhibiting. Atapta, without undergoing. Tapasam, penances. Avitripta Drisham, without fulfillment of vision. Nirnam, of persons. Adaya, taking. Anta, disappearance. Dhat, performed. Ya, he who. Thu, but. Swabimbam, his own form. Lokalochanam, public vision. Translation. Lord Krishna, who manifested his eternal form before the vision of all on the earth, performed his disappearance by removing his form from the sight of those who were unable to see him as he is due to not executing required penance. So one more time, the translation is Lord Shri Krishna, who manifested his eternal form before the vision of all on the earth, performed his disappearance by removing his form from the sight of those who were unable to see him as he is due to not executing required penance. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In this verse, the word Avitripta Drisham is most significant. The conditioned souls in the material world are all trying to satisfy their senses in various ways, but they fail to do so because it is impossible to be satisfied by such efforts. The example of the fish on land is very appropriate. If one takes a fish from the water and puts it on land, it cannot be made happy by any amount of offered pleasure. The spirit soul can be happy only in the association of the Supreme Living Being, the personality of Godhead, and nowhere else. The Lord, by his unlimited causeless mercy, has innumerable Vaikuntha planets in the Brahmajyoti sphere of the spiritual world. And in that transcendental world, there's unlimited arrangement for the unlimited pleasure of the living entities. The Lord himself comes to display his transcendental pastimes, typically represented as Vrindavan, Mathura, and Dwarka. He appears just to attract the conditioned souls back to Godhead, back home to the eternal world. But for want of sufficient piety, the onlookers are not attracted by such pastimes of the Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that only those who have completely surpassed the way of sinful reaction can engage themselves in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. The entire Vedic way of ritualistic performances is to put every conditioned soul on the path of piety. By strict adherence to the prescribed principles for all orders of social life, one can attain the qualities of truthfulness, control of the mind, control of the senses, forbearance, etc., and can be elevated to the plane of rendering pure devotional service to the Lord. Only by such transcendental vision are one's material hankerings fully satisfied. When the Lord was present, persons who were able to satisfy their material hankerings by seeing him in true perspective were thus able to go back with him to his kingdom. But those persons who were unable to see the Lord as he's remained attached to the material hankerings and were not able to go back home, back to Godhead. When the Lord passed beyond the vision of all, he did so in his original eternal form, as stated in this verse. The Lord left in his own body. He did not leave his body, as is generally misunderstood by the conditioned souls. The statement defeats the false propaganda of the faithless non-devotees that the Lord passed away like an ordinary soul. The Lord appeared in order to release the world from the undue burden of the non-believing asuras. And after doing this, he disappeared from the world's eyes. Okay. So, just for a bit of context, Vidura asked Uddhava in this section to tell him about the messages of from Krishna. Vidura wanted to know what were some of the messages and secrets that Krishna shared with Uddhava. And so, Uddhava was unable to answer to that question immediately because he went in excessive anxiety when he started to remember Krishna. And so it's observed that Vidura saw Uddhava having all these transcendental emotions and bodily changes. He went into ecstasy just when Vidura asked Uddhava, "Can you tell me about Lord Krishna?" Uddhava went in this mode of remembrance of Krishna, and Uddhava just went into complete ecstasy, just even thinking of Krishna. And Vidura could see that Uddhava has this extensive love for the Lord. As he saw Uddhava just getting completely lost in that mode. And then Uddhava finally came back to his senses, and he started speaking to Vidura about Krishna's disappearance. That's the topic he started speaking on. And so this verse is in that section where Uddhava is sharing finally with Vidura about the disappearance of Krishna. And so this verse in particular, Uddhava starting to broach the subject of disappearance of Lord Krishna. He's starting to mention and talk about that. So in the purport, there's a couple sort of sections or points that Srila Prabhupada is making here. At a high level, in this verse and the purport, it's being said that when Krishna appeared, so many people saw him, but those people couldn't really see Krishna as he is, as the Lord, because those people weren't performing penances. Those people weren't qualified, per se. So without qualifying regulations of the yogas, these devotees are impurified, and so they weren't able to see Krishna, and the onlookers weren't satisfied with such piety. Is the point that Prabhupada's making. So in the beginning part of this purport, Srila Prabhupada talks a great deal about finding satisfaction, right? In fact, Prabhupada is sort of building this case like a lawyer in this purport. He's saying, hey, the most important word is avatripta drisham, which means without fulfillment of the Lord. And so he's saying that actually one cannot feel satisfied without having this fulfillment or vision of the Lord. One cannot feel satisfied without this avatripta drisham. That's the point Prabhupada is trying to make. So one can only be satisfied when they have constant vision of the Lord. And he's saying no matter what arrangements you make, that satisfaction can only be found within by approaching the Lord. And so he gives this example of the fish on land, which is that if you take a fish from the water and put it on land, no matter what you do, the fish is not going to be happy. The fish will only be happy if it goes back in the water. And so like that, the spirit soul can only be happy in true association of Krishna. That's the sort of very fundamental basic point that Prabhupada is making. And I think it's a very relevant point in the sense that, trying to find satisfaction in life really does begin, even for people that are not devotees, even people that are not practicing devotees. Satisfaction is something that really comes from within, not by achieving a certain set of things, or by getting to certain milestones. Perhaps it really does begin with yourself, and even non-devotees have started to understand that, and Prabhupada is taking that further and saying that satisfaction can only be derived in having this complete association of Krishna. That's the only way to derive that. So I thought that was a very interesting point that Prabhupada is beginning by. Now, then what he's saying is that, okay, so that's where satisfaction can begin, but the term that Prabhupada is using in this purport is that onlookers, people that are just interested in being pious, they or they're not satisfied by just seeing Krishna. And so there's this example of I think there's a pastime of where Krishna was going on was near the washermen of Kamsa, and these washermen severely chastised Krishna, saying, don't touch these clothes. These clothes belong to King Kamsa. If Kamsa were to get a hint of what Krishna you're doing with these clothes, you will be finished. And so the onlookers, these washermen, couldn't see Krishna for who he is. So even though Krishna was present in, on the planet, there's a conception that just because you see Krishna, that's enough. But Prabhupada's making the point that people that are just interested in doing pious activities actually cannot see Krishna. That's who he's defining these onlookers as. And he's in this purport in verse, it says that for people that are just pious, they're doing tapasam. They're refraining themselves from committing any sinful acts, and just instead engaging in any pious activity. They think that I'll make sure to commit not any wrong by moral codes, and I'll just engage in what's good, quote unquote good, right? And so the entire Vedic way of ritualistic performance, in fact, is like the ritualistic part of Vedas is recommending, or the way what it does is it puts every conditioned soul on this path of piety, right? And it's basically like a safety net, right? Where if you do these ritualistic performances, you will be pious and you will be safe from any sinful acts. And so many people at the time when Krishna was there couldn't see for who he was, and therefore if you cannot see Krishna for who he is, then it's hard to be satisfied from within. And so Prabhupada also refers to this verse from Bhagavad Gita chapter 7 verse 28, where he says that people who have acted piously in their previous lives and in this life, and whose sinful actions were completely eradicated, are freed from dualities of delusion, and they are able to engage themselves in Krishna's service with determination. So being pious is a start, but then actually engaging in Krishna is where the finish has to happen. And so Prabhupada is referring this verse from chapter 7 verse 20 of Bhagavad Gita, and then Prabhupada sort of finishes this point by saying that by having strict adherence to prescribed principles of all orders of life, that one can attain the qualities of truthfulness, control of mind, control of senses, and by having that transcendental vision, your material wants then can be satisfied, right? Yeah, he's making this point that by seeing God as he is, even one's material hankerings can be satisfied. But then there's fulfillment when they see God. An example of that is, Dhruva Maharaj wanted to sit on his father's lap. He wanted this, he wanted that sort of, he had that desire. And when he saw Krishna, he forgot all about that. Krishna said, you should rule this kingdom. And Dhruva Maharaj was, no, I don't want that anymore. I don't want this kingdom. His material desires were satisfied by seeing Krishna. But then, of course, upon Vishnu's request, because it was in the service of Vishnu, the Lord did take up the kingdom, and he ended up ruling the kingdom for many years. But the point is that when the material wants get satisfied when they see Krishna. Okay, so then, going going further on, another example of this is of Kubja. When Kubja first saw Krishna, Kubja was this old lady, hunchback lady, who saw Krishna entering Mathura, and again, she had these material desires that she wanted Krishna to satisfy. But when she saw him and had this service attitude, her material desires were taken care of. They were addressed by having the spiritual inclination towards Krishna. And that's sort of the fundamental point that Prabhupada is making, at this satisfaction that we're hankering for, these material desires that we're hankering for, if we're able to see Krishna for who he is, then that is taken care of in general. And so Krishna has a spiritual form. We have material forms that we have coverings of the soul, and Krishna doesn't have this temporary covering, right? Krishna has this spiritual form, and so when they say Krishna left his body, he didn't leave his body as a conditioned soul does, right? The thing is that he appeared in order to release the world from this burden, and once he took care of it, he disappeared. He didn't leave his body, and that's sort of the other doubt that Prabhupada is dispelling this purport. He didn't quote unquote die. He disappeared, which is why we talk about disappearance of Krishna. We never talk about death of Krishna, and because he has a spiritual form versus people in this world have material forms. And so then, how does this whole section apply to us? And as I was thinking about that, even for people that saw Krishna visually, couldn't really see who he is, and that's a big part of that is because those people didn't have association of the devotees of Krishna, right? And so for us, if we can take advantage of that association, our regard for Krishna can only increase, and we can form a relationship there with him. So yeah, anyway, so it was just starting this topic. He'll further continue on this section of answering Vidur's questions about remembering Krishna. And he'll further talk about how Krishna appeared, how he disappeared. What does that really mean? How do the demigods get affected with all of this? And devotees in Braja, how were they affected? What was the relationship like with Krishna? Sort of what he starts to get into in the remaining part of this chapter. So yeah, that's what I had in mind to cover for this verse. Hope everyone has a great Krishna conscious Sunday. Hare Krishna.